All right, hello everyone. I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I'm Amy Spielmaker, I'm the moderator. We have Kristin and Jennifer Daines from Colorado Technical University, and they're gonna be talking about language power and the online classroom. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to them.
Well, hello everyone. Hope you're having an amazing Thursday, and thank you all so much for these incredible presentations, choosing to be here with us to talk through something that I think is extremely important, particularly in the world that we live in. We've been talking so much about the online classroom, technology, but in those conversations about flipping that classroom, inviting students into it, making it easier for them to engage and participate in the knowledge and the tools that make that knowledge possible, we can forget about something so essential and so important, and that is the role that language plays in defining the relationships we have with our students and how those relationships shape and dictate our students' learning experience. The technology that we have is incredible, but as we've discussed, it only works well based on how we use it. And in the online space, our written language is oftentimes the vehicle through which we define not only the relationships between our students and us, but the space within which we learn and the distance between us and them. And that then shapes not only their vision of themselves, their journey of becoming, but also the way in which they see themselves throughout their journey and whether or not they persist and progress through that journey. So today we're going to be talking through the power that language gives us and how we then use that power in the online classroom. How do we use that power to define the space between us and our students? How does our written language establish who our students are, how they see themselves, how they see us, how they participate and connect with the content? And how can we use language more effectively? How can we use it to empower our students and ultimately to deconstruct the systems of power that may have harmed or disadvantaged our students in the past? So today we're going to be talking through understanding today's students and how the pandemic has really brought our understanding of our students into the limelight. We're going to talk about what makes learning meaningful, particularly from the perspective of the writing classroom. We're talking about language, so we're going to take at it from the lens of the written classroom. And then we're also going to talk about distance, the culture of power that's within our current classroom, and how we use language to establish who has power in that classroom, whose voice actually matters. And then as we move into the online classroom, the space, this new reality, these new ideas, how we can already right now begin using language to deconstruct power in the classroom, one word at a time. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to my amazing colleague, Dr. Jennifer Daines, to talk about the students that we see in the online classroom today and how the needs of those students inform the ways in which we use language and, of course, the dynamic of power in our own classrooms.
Thank you. Well, one of the things that we have learned at our own institution over time, and that I think you're probably seeing as well at your institutions, is that our students are changing, in that the students we see in our online classrooms today are very different from those who we have historically seen at traditional schools, in traditional classrooms, as well as those who began and sort of pioneered the online education experience. Today's students can best be described as strivers, and these are often very non-traditional students. They don't fit the definition of what one thinks of when you think college student. They're often first-generation students. They're the first member of their family to attend school. And we see them in our classrooms, and we see them kind of struggling to make sense of and to navigate this new world because they're not familiar with it. These students, these strivers, often see college education as a path to the middle class, or as a way out of a certain standard of living or existence that they want to climb out of and do better. And so they see college as a means to an end, a pathway to the middle class. Most are working while attending school, so they have a lot of competing priorities for their time. And as we're going to talk about today, also for their energy, which is important. Most are parents or caregivers of some sort, in that they're responsible for other people, not just themselves. And unfortunately, most lack confidence and are unsure how to navigate their higher education. They don't have the vocabulary. They don't know who to go to, what to call people even. And I love this quote. I'll let you read it up here by Morton. It says, they get easily frustrated with themselves and view the challenges they confront as a negative reflection on their abilities, rather than as an expression of the difficulty of a topic, a failure on my part to explain it clearly, or a consequence of the difficult situations they contend with at home. So they take it very personally when they can't do something. What else do we know about strivers? Strivers are always having to make impossible choices between two sets of priorities that are at conflict. In other words, they find themselves in situations where there's not really a good answer or a right answer and a wrong answer. They're having to make very difficult decisions. The sacrifices that they make are very real, and the joy of earning a degree does not offset those sacrifices. So they're making difficult decisions, and this knowledge that it's going to be worth it when I get this degree in the end isn't necessarily true for strivers. Because to be successful at school, strivers have to sacrifice a lot of things: relationships that matter to them, responsibilities and commitments to their loved ones and communities. And I can, just as a side note, in my own life, I've experienced some of these things. A few years ago, I was working on my doctorate, and this really rang true to me because I remember making some of those sacrifices. They may sacrifice their inner circle, so their friends, the people close to them, they spend less and less time with as their school takes priority. And in part because of those things, they may also sacrifice part of their identity in order to be successful at school. So what are they doing? Well, especially in this pandemic, what we have found is that all those challenges that our striver students normally deal with have been heightened during the pandemic. Everything we know about them is 10 times more true now. So they are supporting their family and loved ones, working and living in very high stress environments, doing the impossible. They're working full time. They're homeschooling their children at home, being frustrated with Zoom and e-learning. And yet they're somehow holding it all together, but it's a very fragile piece from their perspective, because they're facing uncertainty emotionally, financially, maybe in their relationships because of all this stress. And like I said a minute ago, they're living through situations where there really are no good choices. So they're having to make decisions between options that in their minds are the two less ideal choices, if not 3 or 4. And finally, they're trying to focus on their goals and their dreams when even doing that may not feel right because of those sacrifices. So for example, a typical striver student may be wanting to spend time with a child because it's his or her birthday, and they've got this, celebration coming up, and they're trying to make it special because they can't have a party in a pandemic, and yet they have this assignment due over here. And so what they end up doing is sacrificing this time or this planning for this child in order to get the assignment done. And then they don't feel like they accomplished something. They feel guilty because of what they sacrificed. So those are a little bit about our striver students. So I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, Kristin Yorks, to continue this discussion.
All right, speaking of technology challenges, I'm going to get that mute button right one day. When we think about our student strivers, what we're really thinking about is the space between us and them in the online classroom. It was an amazing quote that I heard at the 2018 Distance Teaching and Learning Conference that talked about the lines between us and our students, and that in the online environment, it's not one to many, but rather many one-on-one connections. So there's actually an increased opportunity for personalization, individualization, and even intimacy that's essential for working with our diverse student population and students who are caught in the midst of these difficult choices, these difficult circumstances, who are striving and trying and yet unsure of how they're going to move forward. But it's not enough to recognize that there are lines that connect us to our students, that student-instructor connection. It's important that we talk about how we define these lines and how the way in which we define these lines dictate the space within which our students learn. These lines can be one-way streets. Knowledge flows from me to them, and that is how it goes. I am here to teach. They are here to learn. They are there to submit assignments. I am here to grade them. It is their journey, their education, and I'm here to help them take the next step. But when we think like that, we create almost a factory line, a space when knowledge only flows one way. And when that
Yep, looks like Kristin froze for a second there. Let's give her a second.
My apologies, everyone, of course. As we all know, of course, right? New normal, Candace, I love it. And when we think through this online classroom, right, these lines between us and our students, what we're really talking about is the classroom as a culture of power. We talk a lot, especially in our writing classrooms, about language is power. Language is empowering. It enables you to do, to be more than you ever thought possible. But what we oftentimes don't discuss is how that same language can actually keep others powerless, depending on how it is used and how it is framed. And when we talk about classrooms, what we're really talking about are issues of power. We don't like to think of our classrooms that way, but they're of the world, and power is a part of that world. And whenever you involve language, if you know Foucault, you know you can't have language, you can't have knowledge without power. These systems construct, they work together, they self-replicate, they self-support. And it's important that we understand that, because those with power are frequently the least likely to recognize it and acknowledge it. And if we don't acknowledge it, if we don't take the steps to understand it, how we create it, how we replicate it, how we sustain it, and then take actual conscious steps to deconstruct it, we find ourselves replicating and repeating those same systems and structures of power that may have held our students back in the past. Those same systems and structures of power that made our students feel powerless, that took away their agency, that deprived them of their ability, their motivation, their encouragement, their hope. And this is why language matters. Because while we can talk a lot about technology, which is extremely important, our LMS systems, our curriculum, and so forth, we have a tool right now that shapes the relationship between us and our students, the distance between us and them, and the way in which they experience everything they encounter in our online classrooms. And that's our language, what it says, how we use it. And to bring up something that Dr. Daines discussed earlier, it's extremely important. Our students don't know these rules. They don't understand the higher education environment. I came from a family, I was the first person in my family to graduate from high school and earn my college degree. First person. So I remember coming into my first college classroom, and I remember that someone had called one of my professors a doctor, and I didn't know what that meant. And I was so afraid to ask a question because I didn't understand the language that was being shared. Was this person a doctor? Was this person not? I didn't want to offend anybody. And it was amazing how something so small had such a dramatic impact on my college experience. So the little ways in which we use language, it matters. Our assumptions inform our perceptions inform our language, and that language defines the space between us and our students. We have a lot of power in the classroom. The question is how we're going to use it. Now, there's one way to use this power. I really love this study done in 2018 by the University of Arizona, where they discussed different focuses. An instrumental focus, which involves a limited one-way relationship in which we have teachers culling little bits of information about students, but the reason for that is to motivate those students to behave well, to do what we tell them to do. I'm here to teach, you're here to learn, follow the syllabus, get your work in on time, done the way that I tell you to do it. And these relationships creates a classroom environment where everything is focused towards student compliance, where students are learning that their value is tied directly to how well they appease the person in authority, how well they do what you tell them to do. And our language reflects this. Our students are reading in between the lines. They're trying to navigate this new world. They're trying to understand their place within it, who they are, how we see them, how they should see themselves. And our language can oftentimes reinforce things that we don't want to, even unconsciously. We're looking here at a few examples of language from an instructor's classroom, language that is not inaccurate. But I want us to think through, as we look at some of these examples, what is being read between the lines, or what's being said between the lines? What's being assumed about a student's motivation, their drive, their focus? What's being assumed about their intelligence, their potential, their capabilities? What this is going to do to the way this student sees their instructor, the way the student sees themselves, and the way they see their potential in their future. Is this going to motivate my students to see what I see in them, which is their incredible potential? The fact that they're going to change the world. I believe it. That's why they're here. Is my language actually conveying that to them? Or is it simply reinforcing that I have power over them and they need to appease me? To quote, "You need more evidence. At least 2 sources were required. You've only presented your opinions, which does not meet the assignment expectations. Did you read the assignment expectations? Extensive errors made reading your work difficult. Did you even proofread it? Writing overall was not at a college level. Please review this link for further guidance and information." And again, it's certainly not inaccurate, but the language is already setting up a power dynamic in which your student or this student feels powerless, chastised for making a mistake, for striving. But we don't have to do that. We can try something different. We can get the same point across in a very, very different way. We can let this student know what they did well. And instead of telling them what they did wrong, how they didn't appease us, we can guide them towards a possibility, motivating and encouraging them to take that next step forward. We don't have to assume that a student hasn't read something or done something. We don't have to chastise them for daring to ask a question about their grading feedback. We can use this as an opportunity to create connection, to keep growing, to keep improving. And we don't have to tell our students that if they don't make my class a priority, well, I can't help them. We don't have to make them choose between us and their family, their friends, the other parts of their life that are so important. We don't have to apologize that they're going through such a difficult time, but then make them make an impossible choice between getting that essay in on time or taking care of a sick child. We can recognize that our students are whole people. They're not just student in my class. They're individual with dreams, with families, with a career, with so much happening of which I am just a small part, and it's my honor to be a part of that. How do I create a path forward? How do I use my words to build a connection with this person so that they have what they need to continue to aspire and work towards their goals in my class? And again, I can commend a student's courage. As Dr. Daines so beautifully pointed out, and if you haven't read Jennifer Morton's research on strivers and moving up without losing your way, you really need to. It's absolutely fabulous. But we don't need to remind our students that they don't belong, that they're facing an uphill battle, that they don't understand the rules. Instead, let's show them it. Let's commend their courage for taking that step forward. Let's let them know that their contributions and ideas have value, even if they're not 100% quite in line with the way we do things. And how can we redirect them? How can we show them and guide them towards those next possibilities? Now, this focus, reciprocal focus, is all about us learning about our students, not to force them to do what we want them to do, not to enforce our power over them, but rather to empower them, to reaffirm their value, the value of their thoughts, their experiences, to truly guide them, to truly support them, not to appease my authority, but rather to empower them to one day become authority figures themselves, to believe in their potential. Now, when we think about this type of language, distance, power, it can get a little abstract. So I like to put it in some very concrete terms that relate to our students and our faculty. And there was some research done a few years ago by the Meaningful Writing Project that asked the question, what makes an assignment meaningful? Beyond just getting a grade and surviving the course, what does it actually take for students to see something that they're doing in your class as being worthwhile, that it matters, it means something? Whether there was a grade attached to it or not, they would find value within it. And they concluded that students need three things: agency, engagement, and transfer. It's very interesting because agency deals directly with power. The thoughts that they have power and control, that their voice matters. Engagement deals specifically with personal connection, the idea that they have a personal connection to the course through their instructor and peers. And it's that personal connection that defines their motivation and the space that they learn within. And transfer. When we think about transfer, aka relevance, we usually focus on, let's say, professional relevance. Can a student apply what I'm teaching them to their careers and to the world beyond the classroom, which is important. But another type of transfer is just as important, that doesn't get discussed as much, and that is valuing student incomes. Does the expertise, the experiences, the insights that students bring into the classroom have value and meaning? Is it just about what I can teach them? Or is it about what they can bring in, teach me and teach one another? I'll turn it over to Jen to talk through some steps for reimagining our role in the classroom and the space between us and our students.
Thank you. So to build on what Kristy was just talking about, this new way, this new approach, it really requires us to rethink their traditional role and really our own identities in some way as faculty members, as instructors, and ask ourselves, is the purpose of our instruction, our being in the classroom, our engagement, is it to instruct or to serve? And that's a little bit of a mind shift when we start thinking about our students as individual students we serve, as opposed to a class we teach. Subtle differences there. We want our instruction not to assess, but to guide. So does our gradebook feedback, for example, is it meaningful, and is it just assessing, the student did this right, the student did this wrong, this is why they lost points, or is it a useful tool for guiding that student? Again, do we want our instruction just to test or to teach? And I think historically, that classroom was a space for testing and for constantly assessing knowledge. But if we think about what these students, what these strivers need, they need guidance and teaching. Put the dots close together and guide them from one to the next. Our instruction is not to judge, but to trust. And that, where that comes into play really is in our interaction with students. And as Kristy said, taking their incomes, and our assumptions should be that they have value, and that we're communicating to our students that what they bring to the classroom has value. So even when they say something in a discussion board, for example, that's kind of completely off the wall or not where we were going with the assignment at all, can we trust that their response was genuine, that it was meaningful to them, and can we take that and make a connection to the content of what we're trying to teach them, as opposed to saying, well, that's not really pertinent to the question, or that didn't apply to what we were teaching. We want our instruction not to force, but to inspire. And that's really, I think, the changing nature of the role of faculty right now, especially in a pandemic, is, are we helping our students? Are we inspiring them that they can do this, even when life gets really, really hard for them, as it is for many of them right now? We want our instruction not just to challenge, but to empower. And so it really, this approach really calls into question and asks us to challenge our traditional notions of our role as instructors in the classroom. Certainly, like, instructors, probably many of us grew up or went through the ranks having. So can you advance that slide, Kristy? Okay, I'm having technology issues, so my slides, I'm not seeing them as well, but that's on my end, I think. So another way that we think of this is again, getting back to the language. So language-wise, what does this mean? Well, it means that we want to use our language to build confidence, to create trust, and to inspire progress and learning. And so what we want to do is use a lot of motivational quotes, proactive outreach, so reaching out to that student who's not participating in class, or who maybe did an assignment wrong or didn't do all of it. Explaining to the student what they can do in our communication versus what they did not do on their assignment. And just that these little minute language choices we make so much of a difference to students. And I can, from an instructor standpoint, I was one of the probably worst offenders of not doing this when I started out as a professor many, many years ago, because I came from a background where I was coming out of the military. I was used to very formal, very professional speech. And over time, I realized that what I thought was very professional and very formal did not come across that way to my students. It came across as maybe a little cold or unfeeling. And so I really had to shift my mindset about my own language I use with students. And then in this past year, as a parent, seeing some of my college-age students take their classes online at various institutions throughout the state, seeing some of their communication, it really struck me as, because now I'm mom, looking at this from a completely different angle. It really struck me as how much those little word choices matter, and how as instructors we have so much power in the language that we use, because we can either inspire and motivate, or we can destroy a student's confidence with one sentence. And so this is really personal for me, not just as an instructor, but as a parent as well. It requires us to trust our students, and that can be challenging, especially when, the example I gave earlier, if a student completely goes kind of off the wall with a discussion board response or an assignment, and we have to sort of trust that, okay, they said what they said, or did it a certain way for a reason. How do we pull them back? It involves us checking in on students, not on assignments, and that's a very subtle detail. So when a student misses something, instead of just sending them a message and say, I didn't get this assignment from you, when are you going to turn this in? Saying, how are you doing? Do you need help? Is there a place you're stuck that I can help you with? Not that I can help you accomplish this assignment. It's how we use language to show we care about our students. It's speaking to their goals and not to ours. So again, focusing on them, not on the assignments or the class. And it's using praise as a way to create a path forward. So I teach English composition, and at an open enrollment institution. And so we occasionally get students who really struggle with writing. And one of the things that I tell myself, and we tell our faculty, is, you don't have to point out everything that student did wrong on that essay in your feedback. You can focus on the most important thing they need to work on first, and then put those stepping stones very close together to get them where you want them to go. Otherwise, the feedback is overwhelmingly negative from their perspective. This approach to language involves engaging with, giving credit to, and valuing their ideas, no matter how off the mark or even silly sometimes they may sound. but really understanding them and getting to know them and seeing why did they say that, where did that come from, and it really kind of getting in our students' mind and thinking, how did they come up with that and connect it to this content, and how can I tie it back to where I want them to go. And finally, this approach involves respecting their language and incomes, and without getting into too much on curriculum, because like I said, I teach English composition, and of course we want them to write well and to speak well and to present themselves professionally, but it's rethinking the ways we do that, and not criticizing every comma misplaced, not criticizing a certain way that their voice in an essay or in a discussion board, but taking it for what it is, valuing it, and helping them move from wherever they are to the next point. And then the other thing is just reaffirming to them, saying and writing to them over and over and over again that they have value and that we believe in them. As Kristin will get into with this next discussion, it's really those faculty who are able to convey that care and trust for students and that value through their language, through that almost cheerleading, that are the most successful ultimately at getting their students to meet their educational outcomes in those courses. So this has really required me as an individual to change my language approach to students, because this is not my natural personality to be that positive cheerleader type. But what we have found is that it is really needed by our students, especially right now, and very effective. And so I will let Kristin provide some examples of that.
Absolutely. And when we look through these examples, it's really important to note that these are coming from a 100 level composition classroom, which our students love. No, not at all. They dread it. They're not looking forward to it. There's so much writing anxiety that they bring into the classroom, and there's no doubt why, because writing is learning in all of its agony and glory. When you put a student into a writing classroom, you're essentially asking them to make a lot of mistakes over and over and over again, to put something out there knowing it's going to be critiqued, knowing it's not going to be perfect, knowing that failing is going to be a part of the process. That's what writing is. And when we look at our student strivers who see any indication that they've done something wrong, when they get that discouragement, they trace it back to a fault within them. That it's not, this is hard and that's a good thing. It's not, oh, I have to do this or draft this again, and that's a natural step in the progression in my learning. They see it as yet another sign that they don't belong. This world is not for them. And we see instances of students who will participate in these classes. They'll try an assignment out, and based on the way in which their instructor words that feedback or reaches out to them, that student decides either to drop out completely or to keep striving and persisting. And we all know examples of students like that in our own classrooms. And I wanted to show some examples of what this philosophy, what this approach to language in the classroom looks like in action. And for this example, we have a student who has not participated in the course in several weeks. And despite the lack of activity and engagement, the faculty member continued to send motivational quotes and sayings, not telling the student, where are you? Why haven't you submitted your Unit 2 assignment? Not saying you've fallen behind, you're at risk of failing the course, but motivational quotes like, believe in yourself and all that you are. And when that student finally did take that step 3 weeks later and submitted an assignment, even though it wasn't perfect, rather than letting the student know how much more work they had to do, or the fact that they didn't quite get that assignment done properly, the feedback from the faculty member in our messaging system was, it was amazing to see you. Thank you so much for your hard work and for getting back in the classroom. And when I read this student response, it really touched me. Because even if we're not getting any feedback, sometimes we think that our messages, our grading feedback, our responses, they're just going out into that black hole and not being seen. But this student let this faculty member know that they made a difference. They hadn't been responding back, they hadn't been participating, but they had been struggling. And knowing that someone cared about them gave them what they needed to keep pressing forward. And I believe that without those quotes, without those saying, without this faculty member's language and persistence in using this language and this approach, that student would not have persisted, would not have re-entered the classroom. And in a writing classroom, we see students who get very overwhelmed, very anxious. We see a lot of resubmissions. And this student resubmitted their big project, I think, 4 times. As he said, got kind of overwhelmed with it. Happens. Now, one way to approach this is, of course, to let the student know that it is perfectly acceptable to resubmit. The instructor could have said something along the lines of, it's okay to resubmit, but next time proofread your work carefully, set aside the time to make sure you're doing it right the first time. And my goodness, would that not be discouraging to this student who's already feeling overwhelmed and anxious? So we get the same point across, but we rephrase it, tie it back to the course, and empower the student, letting them know that not only is it okay to resubmit, but that this is to be expected. It's a part of the writing process. With things that matter, it takes a few times to get it right, and offering assistance and help. And what that does is it doesn't just create an opportunity for the student to participate in the course, to submit the assignment, but for the student to feel empowered by doing so, that they're taking that next step forward, that they have some agency in that situation. That agency, coupled with that connection and that respect for their incomes, makes all the difference. And again, it's just some slight differences in the ways in which we're using language to forge those connections. And we all know that students, they'll do some hard work, they'll do some great work, but sometimes they're going to struggle. Sometimes the grade isn't going to be exactly what they expect or exactly what they think they've earned. There's going to be some concerns and questions there. But just because a student hasn't submitted something that's perfect doesn't mean that we can't acknowledge the hard work that they did, or let them know that we appreciate the fact that they have invested time in our class. The time that our students invest in our classrooms, that they work on their assignments, is time that they could have spent elsewhere. It's time stolen from work, that the second shift they could have gotten to put more money in the bank for their family. It's time spent away from children, from parents, from loved ones. And even if the work is not perfect, acknowledging that it took hard work to do that. It took a sacrifice of time and energy. And when we acknowledge that hard work, letting them know what they did well and pointing out their opportunities for improvement in a way that encourages them to do better. And as we see here, see a student who, again, struggled with an assignment. We acknowledge that hard work, let them know what they did well, let them know they've got some things to work on, but that we're proud of them. And the student's response, well, you can't ask for anything better, right? I'll do even better on the last 2 assignments. Now, when we talk about valuing student incomes, discussion board responses in our online classrooms are a beautiful place to do this. They're an opportunity not to direct students back to what we want them to learn or what we are teaching, but to ultimately do the hard work of building a bridge between their incomes and insights and our own expertise, and doing so to build confidence within our students, valuing what they bring to the table and speaking not to the content, not to the subject area, not to the objectives, but to them. And in this example here, we have a student who the discussion board was about arguments, and this student had a fantastic example of an argument she had with I think it was with a coworker in the restaurant industry. And instead of redirecting her back towards a rather boring textbook discussion of rhetoric and argumentative writing, let's go with it. Let's talk about her expertise. Let's break down the rhetorical strategies she used in this particular instance and why they're so amazing. And let's really encourage and support the student in the process. Not only does it achieve the goal of getting them to connect with these concepts and ideas, but it builds them up. It lets them know that they belong, lets them know that they have value, and encourages them to keep learning and striving, especially in an environment where we're going to ask them, like the writing classroom, to make a lot of mistakes over and over and over again. And the funny thing is, when we do this, something happens behind the scenes that we don't always see. In these 2 weeks, we have a discussion board forum, and this particular student was not very excited to be in this classroom and was not very excited to be talking about arguments or argumentative writing, as could be seen in their week 1 post, which certainly has some colorful language attached to it. Student was not very happy at all about participating in this discussion or talking or reflecting on writing and arguments in general. But the faculty members' approach, their use of language, flipped the script. Talk a lot about flipping the classroom, but flipping the classroom doesn't just mean kind of having students discuss more, it means flipping the power. It really does. It means putting our students first, using our position of power to give it to them, to empower them within the classroom. And when we do that through something as simple as changing our approach to language, what we find is not only that they're learning, but that they love what they're learning. They find meaning in it. How do we go from, because the manager didn't give a about what Google stated, to understanding something makes the smallest sentence bigger than the earth itself, or words are so powerful? That mindset shift that happened within that particular student happened because of the way the faculty member approached them. The way the faculty member used language to connect with them changed the way the students saw not only the course and the content, but words themselves and their role within that process. And we can say to ourselves that, well, maybe this doesn't really matter that much. Our students are here to learn, we're here to teach. Is caring really that important? I was having a conference with a faculty member, and the faculty member said to me, "So you want me to be nicer?" I was like, no, that's not it at all. What we want is a culture and a system in which we are recognizing the structures of power in our classroom and actively using our language to deconstruct them, putting the agency back in the laps of our students, empowering them, letting them know that their value is not linked to a grade or an assignment. Their value, their humanity is inherent. It's not about appeasing me. I'm here to support and guide them. Only they can take those next steps forward, but I'll be with them every step of the way to support them. And when we take that approach and when we express that approach through our language, when we let our students know that the script has been flipped, when we use language to define and establish their power, their authority, their purpose, we see something beautiful happen. We see students saying things like, teachers make our learning experience better. And I have a family of teachers who care for their students. We see them recognizing their value and their power, and that lasts much longer than just one course. That not only sustains them throughout their higher education, but empowers them after it. And so it's up to us to really reimagine the virtual classroom, and we can do this one word at a time. Our Striver students have been through the impossible. I had the privilege of hearing an incredible speaker at a conference who said quite frankly, I don't want to be one more hard thing my students have to endure. And that's the way that I try to think about my classroom, and I want all of us to think about our classroom. I don't want my classroom to be one more thing they have to endure, one more thing they have to survive. I don't want to put my students who are in many areas of their life already feel disempowered in another situation where an authority figure is standing before them and they must appease them, another gatekeeper that they have to face on the path to their degree, their dreams, and all the amazing things that happen during and beyond it. I don't want them to feel like they've got to wait to earn a degree to have something worth saying, something worth doing, something worth striving for. So when we talk about the lines between us and our students and the language we use that affirms and establishes those lines, that distance, the lines between us don't have to be lines. The classroom doesn't have to be a one-way street of information. They can be webs. It can be about, or the relationships with our students don't have to be about control. It doesn't have to be about getting them to do this. Our relationships can be about learning. They can be about support. They can be about compassion. They can be about our value, their inherent value, and us working with them not to teach them something, but to empower them to explore, to find the answers that they seek, to recognize their potential and work towards it. All right, if you'd like some further reading, lots of great stuff here, and I'd be more than happy to share all the incredible, fantastic research out there about power, language, and the online classroom, as well as student strivers. But anytime we talk about power, there's a lot to discuss. So I wanted to make sure we left ample time for that discussion and any questions that we might have. All right. And are there any questions or any other topics to explore?
Since I can unmute myself, I'm going to. Is that all right?
Yes, absolutely, Sophia, please do.
Wonderful. Sophia here. I think this is really wonderful, and all of your examples are incredible. I'm wondering, maybe you hinted at this and I just have forgotten or didn't comprehend it. Have you ever had a student who really is sort of resistant to your compassion and openness to let them strive? And the reason why I ask is because I feel like I have tried this before. I'm not a full-time instructor. It's sort of like I teach when they need me to. And sometimes I think students are unused to having this type of environment. So when you do open it up, they're sort of like, well, this is creepy, or I don't really know what to do with this situation. This person is being nice to me. Anyway, I'm curious if you have ever experienced that and how it went, and where you stand today on it.
I think that's a beautiful question. I think it illustrates exactly what we're trying to do in the classroom, which is that for many of our students, they have experienced many hard things. They've been in a state of fight or flight for a very long time, where aggression is the only way they've found to get things done, where other people have had power over them, and the only way to subvert that is to have power over the other person. We oftentimes see that with, let's say a student has a question about a grade, and all they have to do is reach out and ask, and we're more than willing to help, but they ask very aggressively, or there's a lot of anger attributed to it. And that's because that student has encountered this situation in the past, and they've been taught that that's the only way to be heard, is to be very loud and aggressive. And I remember I had a student, I do badges and virtual high fives in our adaptive learning platform to congratulate students for taking that next step forward and doing well. And I had a student reach back and say, "Are you for real? Is this actually a thing?" And I responded back and I was like, "Yes, absolutely. I'm really proud of you. Thank you so much. I know the amount of time and effort that took. And I just want you to know that I recognize your hard work." And he messaged me back and he went, "Oh, cool." And that was that was the end of that. But just because our students aren't used to it doesn't mean that they should be. Like, I shudder to think of a world in which we are trained to not expect kindness and compassion, particularly in a space where we're learning, where compassion, empathy, understanding are pretty much an essential component to the learning process. And so with those students, I found that it's a matter of explaining to them why we're proud, why we're encouraging, providing very clear guidelines so they can understand what we're working towards together, and modeling for them the type of professional relationships that they should expect. They should expect a faculty member who cares about them. They should expect that if they haven't been in the classroom for 3 weeks, their faculty member reaches out and says, "I'm worried about you. Are you okay?" And I always see that as my privilege to set that expectation for them so that they can come to expect that in their lives, not just in the classroom, but beyond it.
Yeah, it takes a level of authenticity, excuse me, that I think sometimes is not what is reinforced in instructional training in higher ed. So I really appreciate this presentation from that point of view of like, you have to be authentic. You can't just be proud and tell them you're proud and share these quotes without it actually coming from a place of compassion. So thank you.
Yeah, I think that's so important. So I always tell my faculty, so I'll share my examples with them, but I always say to them, don't just copy and paste what I do, right? I've got an instructor, he's absolutely incredible. If he copied my outreach, the students would message it back and be like, "Are you okay? Did somebody steal access to
Have
your
you been
class?
hacked?
Have you been
Yeah,
hacked? This doesn't sound like you at all." So
that's
it's
funny.
not, yep, so it's about being compassionate and authentic with your language. And it's really ultimately, when we think about it, coming down, or when we come down to it, it's ultimately about your drive and purpose as an instructor. And that's really where power resides, is understanding our own motivations. Is the motivation for this to get our students to do something? Is it to appease us? Is it to satisfy my ego? I worked really hard to become an expert at this. I expect my students to learn from me. Or are we there to serve them on their journey? It's a very subtle shift, but when we make that mindset shift, it makes perfect sense that we're going to adapt and adjust our language to meet those motivations and those goals.
Thank you.
Absolutely. See, Marie has her hand up.
Just a comment about showing care for students. This term I became really quite concerned about a student who had revealed in a discussion that he had contracted COVID and that his 5-year-old son had it too. And at first I didn't quite know how to respond, but I finally decided that I would. And I said, I'm sorry, Nick, I acknowledge that this is none of my business, but in the spirit of human care, are you receiving some medical attention? Now, he could have responded to me by saying, yes, Marie, that is none of your business. But fortunately, he didn't. And he said, yes, thank you for caring. My best friend here is a physician, so I am being well cared for. Well, I thought about sort of invading into student privacy, but under the circumstances and given his response, I felt okay about asking him because he was obviously struggling and he was struggling to do the coursework. But and now we've subsequently developed quite a lovely relationship about the class and about his son and about him. So it opened the way for me to begin to develop a connection with him. But at first, I really did have some pause. Thanks.
No, of course. And it's good to have those pause because we want to respect our students' privacy, their boundaries, what they're comfortable sharing and not sharing.
Right.
But I've never had a bad reaction to saying to a student, are you okay?
Yeah.
And I always let my students know that when they may message or call or say anything like that, just let them know, I'm here for you. Tell me what you need, right? If you want to call me, if you want to talk about it, please let me know, but know that I'll always work with you when it comes to the classroom.
Yeah.
And I think especially in times like this, even if students don't respond back with that necessarily, even if they don't feel comfortable sharing, just asking someone if they're okay can be a very big deal. I was having a conversation with a colleague the other day who is a faculty member and is having a little bit of a rough time and missing grading deadlines, things like that. And I reached out and I didn't start by saying, you're missing X and X, what's going on? You're not meeting expectations. It was, are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help?
Mm-hmm.
And something as simple as that completely changes the dynamic of that conversation. And of course, what happens as a result of it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you. All right, we are at time here. Thank you, Kristin and Jennifer. That was very, very timely topic, of course. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording now.